Frank, be realistic, you're never home anyway. That's what my sister-in-law Amber said to me, in my father's kitchen, standing at my father's counter, drinking out of my father's coffee mug. And about 10 seconds before that, my older brother Clint had told me the house was basically ours at this point, and that if I wanted to make things complicated, I should think real hard about what that costs. I was 40 years old. I had never once put my name on a piece of paper giving away so much as a square inch of that property, and I want you to know exactly what I did next. I smiled. I said, okay. And I walked out to my truck and drove back to the job site and didn't say another word to either of them. They thought I'd back down. I know that because my brother called our cousin in Phoenix that same night and told him it was settled. It wasn't settled. It was about 6 weeks from being settled, and the settlement looked nothing like what he had in mind. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and none of this means anything unless I tell it right. My name is Frank Dolan. I'm 40 years old. I'm an electrician, started my own contracting business 9 years ago, just me and one van. Now I've got 11 guys on payroll in a second location in Colorado Springs. I did not come from money. My father Gerald worked 31 years for the city of Denver in the roads department, potholes and drainage, and the seasonal grind of people who keep infrastructure running so nobody ever has to think about it. My mother left when my brother and I were kids, and that's a longer story for another time, but what it means here is that my dad raised 2 boys alone in a 3-bedroom ranch house in Lakewood that he bought in 1989 for $112,000 and paid off completely by 2011. He was proud of that. He used to say paying off the house was the only thing he ever finished ahead of schedule, and the way he said it, you understood that finishing ahead of schedule was the highest thing a man could do. When my father died 2.5 years ago, cardiac event, fast, no warning, a Thursday afternoon in October, he left a will, and the will left everything to me, not to Clint and me. To me. I want to explain that because it's the detail people assume there's another side to, and there isn't one, not really. My father and my brother had a falling out about 7 years before he died. I was not in the middle of it, and I don't fully know every piece of it. What I know is that my father told me directly about a year before he died that he was leaving the house to me, and he told me why, and I'm not going to repeat his reasons because they were his to give and I have no need to justify them. The will was legal, it was clear, and the house, worth about $520,000 by the time of his death, was mine, solely and entirely. The problem, if I'm honest about it, is that I wasn't there enough to act like it. I'm on job sites 6 days a week in peak season. During winter, I travel to bid commercial contracts. When my father died, I was genuinely lost in a way I didn't know how to be. He was the only consistent thing in my childhood after my mother left, and I had spent my whole adult life trying to become the kind of man he'd respect, and then he was gone before I got to find out if I'd done it. I ate a lot of fast food alone in my truck that first year. I called the house sometimes and let it ring because I kept forgetting he wasn't going to pick up. I was not handling it. And Clint said, let us move in for a while, just until things settle. You're never there anyway, and the house shouldn't sit empty. I said yes. I don't regret saying yes because I think I needed to say it. I needed someone in that house. What I didn't understand was who they were going to become once they were inside it. For the first few months it was fine. There was noise in there, light in the windows when I drove past. Amber would send me pictures of their daughter Becca playing in the backyard, and it felt like the house was being used the way a house should be used, and I told myself that was enough. Then it started, and it was never anything big at first. It is never anything big at first. The first thing was the garage. My father had a workbench out there that he built himself out of Douglas fir in 1994. It was enormous and impractical, and I loved it unreasonably. Every tool he owned had a spot on that bench. He used to stand at it on Saturday mornings with a coffee, not even working on anything, just looking at it. I understand now that a man who spent his whole career fixing things other people broke needs one space where everything is exactly where it belongs. That bench was his. It was the one thing in the house that was purely, completely his. Amber sold it to the neighbor for $200. I found out 3 weeks later. She said they needed space for storage bins, and she hadn't thought I'd care because I was never out there using it anyway. I stood in that empty garage and looked at the 4 darker squares on the floor where the legs had been, and I said nothing. I went back to my truck. I drove away. That's how it goes. You say nothing because saying something would make you difficult, and you're already grieving, and you don't want to be difficult on top of grieving, and then you say nothing the next time because you already said nothing the first time. And then you look up, and you don't recognize who you've become in the silence. The photographs came next. My dad wasn't a sentimental man except in specific ways, and one of those ways was pictures. He had them all over the living room, me and Clint as kids, his own parents at their kitchen table, a crew photo from 1995 of his road department guys, all of them coated in orange dust and grinning like they'd gotten away with something. Amber took them down slowly over about 4 months and replaced them with prints she ordered from some online shop. I noticed it happening and told myself it was just decorating. The crew photo ended up in a box in the hall closet. I found it when I was looking for the circuit breaker key. Then there was the bathroom renovation. I stopped by one Sunday to pick up some tools I needed for a job in Aurora. I came through the back door the way I always did and found two contractors in the hallway laying new tile in the main bathroom. Frameless glass shower door, heated floor. Amber came out and said they were finally making it functional and did I want to stay for dinner. Like I was a neighbor who'd dropped in. I asked who had authorized the work. She looked at me the way you look at someone who's asked something confusing. She said, "Clint and I live here." I drove home that night and sat in my apartment in Capitol Hill. I keep a one-bedroom there for when I'm working in the city, and I thought for a long time. I thought about what exactly I was doing and what I was waiting for, and I realized I was doing what I always do on a job where something's going wrong. I was hoping it would correct itself if I gave it enough time. That's not a strategy. That's just hoping. The night I understood it fully was a Tuesday in November. I'd wrapped up a commercial bid down in Colorado Springs and drove back up I-25 and stopped by the house to get my father's old level, a 48-inch Stabila that he'd had since before I was born and that I was not about to lose. I came in through the kitchen door. The lights were on in the living room and I could hear Clint and Amber in there with a speakerphone going. I stopped just inside the door because I heard a name I recognized, a woman from a real estate brokerage in Lakewood. They were talking about listing the property. I want to be accurate about what I heard. My brother was talking about spring timing. Amber was talking about staging and what to do about the clutter in the back room, meaning my father's remaining things. The realtor was talking about comps in the neighborhood and said that with the renovations they'd done, they were probably looking at upper fives, maybe just over 600. And Clint said, "Great, let's plan for March." Nobody had called me, nobody had asked. They were listing a house I owned in March while I was standing in the kitchen in the dark. I stood there long enough that my brother actually came in for a beer and found me by the refrigerator and startled so hard he grabbed the counter. He said, "What the hell, Frank?" I said I came for Dad's level. I got it off the counter. I walked out. I did not say a word about what I'd heard. I know that surprises people. Here's the thing about me. I don't make sound decisions when I'm angry in the dark. I make them at 5 in the morning with the first cup of coffee before the day has started. So I went home, I slept, and I got up early and called a family law and estate attorney named Rebecca Horn, who a guy on my crew had used for a probate matter, and I made an appointment. Rebecca is methodical. She doesn't perform outrage. She's in her late 40s and she wears her reading glasses on a chain, and the first thing she said when I finished explaining was, "Who drew up the will?" I told her. She said, "I know that firm, let's pull the documents." And then she did something nobody had done for me in 2 years. She laid out the legal reality plainly and completely, without softening it. The house was mine. No joint interest had ever been created. Nothing my brother had done, not the renovations, not the call with the realtor, had given him any standing whatsoever. He was a guest who had stopped believing he was a guest. She asked me what I wanted. I had to sit with that for a while. The honest answer was that I didn't particularly want the house. I hadn't lived in it in years. My father wasn't in it anymore. His workbench wasn't in it. His photographs were in a closet box. What was there was my brother's vision of a nice house, and that vision and I had nothing in common, so I asked myself what my father would have done with it. And that answer came quickly, because I knew my father. My dad was a foster kid. He didn't lead with it, but he grew up in the system from age 9 until he aged out at 18, and he used to say that the worst part of it wasn't any single placement. It was the moment each one ended when you were moved again before you'd figured out whether the place you were in was safe. He was a patient man, but he was a man who understood at a cellular level what it cost a person to have nowhere to belong. There's a nonprofit in the Denver Metro called the Threshold Project. They run transitional housing for young adults aging out of foster care, 18 to 24, the gap where kids fall off the map if nobody catches them. I knew about it because one of my guys, a kid named Tommy who does rough-in work and is one of the best young electricians I've seen, had been in their program at 19. He told me about it once over lunch on a job site. I don't think he knew I filed it away. The problem Threshold had was scale. One converted duplex in Arvada and a waiting list of 47 names. I went and looked at what they were working with before I decided anything. Their director, a woman named Gwen, walked me through it. The duplex was decent but maxed out. There was a family, a mother and her 2 kids, sleeping in a common room because there was nowhere else, and Gwen apologized twice for the water pressure. I stood in that hallway and thought about 3 empty bedrooms sitting in Lakewood while 47 names sat on a list. That was the whole decision. 4 seconds, I've never looked back at it. Rebecca drafted everything with the same precision she brought to the rest of the process. We transferred the property to the Threshold Project in the 2nd week of January. One condition: the house had to be called the Gerald Dolan house. My father spent 31 years fixing Denver's roads. It seemed right that the house he paid off year by year would become a place where kids who'd been handed a broken road had somewhere stable to land. I want to be honest about the 11 weeks between that November night and the January closing, because I think people imagine I was cold and strategic during that time, and I was neither. I went to Christmas at the house. I sat at my father's dining room table and I ate Amber's cooking and watched my niece Becca open presents. I held her on my lap while she showed me the doll she'd gotten, and I thought about the fact that she is blameless in all of this and always will be. I did not feel clever in those 11 weeks. I felt like a man watching a slow-moving storm from a distance, knowing where it was going to land and having decided he wasn't going to try to divert it anymore. The certified notice went out in late January. My brother signed for it. I have his signature on the return receipt. What he did with it was nothing. He put it in a drawer. He told Amber he was going to handle it, and then he didn't handle it, and he didn't tell her what it said, and he didn't call me, not once. I've thought about this for a long time, and I think I understand it the same way I understand a lot of things about my brother. Clint is a man who has always believed that situations resolve in his favor if he waits long enough. Sometimes that's worked for him. This time it worked against him in a way he didn't see coming, because he'd spent 43 years in a family where it had always worked, because I'd always eventually let it. I was at the house in early March, the month he'd told the realtor they'd list it, because Gwen and her architect had scheduled a walkthrough to plan the conversion. I was there in the living room with Gwen and 2 contractors when my brother came downstairs at 9:30 in the morning in his bathrobe and found 4 people with clipboards and floor plans spread across the dining room table. He looked at me, he looked at Gwen, he looked at the plans, he ran the math. He said, "Frank, what is this?" Not a question, a man trying to locate a foothold. And Amber came downstairs behind him. She was carrying a box. She'd been sorting through the upstairs closet. She stopped on the 3rd step and she had a box of my father's things in her arms, his old city ID badge from 1993, his service club pins, a folded certificate from when his crew won a safety award in 2004, things she'd pulled out to make space. She stood on that step holding a box of my dead father's life, and she looked at the plans on the table and then she looked at me. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment because people expect a particular emotion, and it wasn't that. It wasn't satisfaction. It was closer to what you feel when a long, difficult job is finally done. Not joy exactly, but the particular relief of something being finished right. Rebecca stepped forward. She introduced herself and explained, completely and without drama, that the property had transferred to a non-profit organization in January, that written notice had been provided and signed for, and that she had documentation of the entire process if either of them wanted to review it. She'd brought copies. Of course she had. My brother said, "You can't do this." Rebecca said he can, and he did. Amber turned to my brother and said, "Clint, what notice? What is she talking about?" And my brother didn't answer, and that silence answered her. I walked over to Amber and I took the box out of her arms because she was shaking and it seemed like the decent thing to do. I said the only words I said that entire morning, "I'll take that," and I picked up my jacket and I walked out through the kitchen door. Now the honest part, because every story like this wants to end at the dramatic beat, and that's not actually the whole story. My brother and Amber had already given notice on their apartment in Aurora. They had a 6-year-old and nowhere to go on short notice. That was real, and I want to be clear, I have never once felt good about that part. Becca is 6 years old. Becca is completely blameless. I called their former landlord myself and asked if their unit was still available. It was. He held it for 10 days. I covered the first month's rent. I'm not telling you that to make myself sound generous. I'm telling you because it happened, and leaving it out would be dishonest. My brother and I didn't speak for 5 months. Then in August he called and I answered, and we met at a diner on Kipling that my dad used to go to every Tuesday for the Blue Plate special, and it was not a warm conversation. Clint told me I'd humiliated him. I said that was fair, and that I was sorry it had happened in front of Amber, and that I would do it the same way again. And then he said the thing I keep coming back to. He said, "You could have just talked to me, Frank. So I sent you a certified letter, Clint." And he sat there, and I watched him really understand for the first time that he had received legal documentation and filed it under things that would resolve themselves. He'd done to me what he'd done his whole life, assumed that the older brother dynamic would override the situation if he waited long enough. It never had to because I'd always stepped back. At 40 years old, that was the first time I hadn't. I don't have a clean word for what we are now. We talk, it's careful, he's working a job he doesn't love. I have not offered him a contract, I'm not going to, not yet. That's the most honest sentence in this whole story. The Gerald Dolan house opened in September. 12 residents in the first cohort, ages 19 to 23. Tommy from my crew was at the opening. He shook my hand and didn't say much, and I understood he wasn't trying to say much. Some things you just stand next to for a minute. I go on Saturdays sometimes. I don't pretend to be useful. I'm a contractor, not a caseworker, and I'd be in the way if I tried to be something I'm not. Mostly I check that the electrical is right. These old Lakewood houses have their quirks, and then I sit on the back porch for a while. There's a kid there named Arturo, 19, been in the system since he was 11, who wants to get into the trades. I've been telling him about the apprenticeship programs, what they require, what they pay, what the pathway looks like. I'm not making promises. I'm just showing him what the door looks like and how to knock on it. My father would have done the same. I have his photographs up in my apartment now. The crew photo from 1995 hangs in my kitchen. Every morning when I'm making coffee, I look at those guys in their orange dust and their hard hats, all of them grinning, and I think about what it means to spend decades doing work that nobody notices until it stops working. That's most work, if you're honest about it. That's most people. My sister-in-law told me I was never home enough to deserve that house. She wasn't wrong about the before. I was gone too much. I was building a business and putting in hours, and telling myself the house would still be there when things slowed down, and I was right that the house would be there and wrong about what it would mean when I got back to it. That part belongs to me. What she was wrong about was the conclusion she drew. She thought being absent meant I had forfeited something. I think it meant I owed something, just not to her. There are kids sleeping in those rooms tonight who aged out of a system that handed them a broken road and said good luck. My father spent 31 years fixing broken roads for a city that never knew his name. He would have understood those kids without needing it explained. He would have liked this better than anything else I could have done with the place, and I know that without being able to ask him, which is the closest thing to still knowing someone after they're gone. That's the whole thing. Everything else, the floor plans on the dining room table, the box on the stairs, my brother standing there in his bathrobe doing the math, that's just what happens when you finally stop moving your chair out of the room every time somebody needs to redecorate. If you've ever let someone slowly convince you that your grief made you careless and that their being there made it theirs, I'd like to hear about it down below, not because I have a clean answer. I'm still working through the edges of this one, but I know I'm not the only person who ever stood in a dark kitchen and decided to say nothing, and I know for some of you the silence was the wrong call, and for some of you it was the only call left. And I think there's something worth saying about knowing which is which. Tell me about it. And if there's somebody in your life who kept your father's things in a box when they should have kept them on the wall, say their name today, somewhere. They won't know you did it, but you will. And sometimes that's exactly the right amount.